60 feet down, in the water where Argentina meets the sea, a team of divers has just cut open a sealed room inside a World War II submarine. And inside that room, they found a book, but it was not a crew list. It was a passenger log, 61 names written by hand, and 9 of them are American. So if you think you know how the Third Reich really ended, wait until you hear what this river just gave back. The boat that came back too late. Germany surrendered on the 8th of May, 1945, and every U-boat still at sea got the same order from Berlin. Grand Admiral Karl Dönitz himself commanded them to surface, raise a black flag, sail to the nearest Allied port, and give up. Most of them obeyed, except one. U-530 stayed under, through May and through June, and then, on the 10th of July, 63 days after the war she was built to fight had ended. She rose quietly to the surface off the coast of Argentina, thousands of miles from home, and asked to surrender. Her captain had an explanation ready because he said he thought the surrender order was a trick, an enemy lie meant to lure German boats into a trap. So he ran. But here is the first thing that does not fit. When the war ended, U-530 was sitting up in the North Atlantic, about 1,000 miles from Puerto Rico. And if a frightened captain only wanted to wait out a trap, he should wait where he was. He does not point his boat at the bottom of the world and sail for 2 months across the equator to a country no one ever ordered him to. That is not a man delaying the end. That is a man following a route. And the route mattered because Argentina was not a random dot on the map. In 1945, Argentina was one of the few places on Earth quietly friendly to a certain kind of German passenger. So when the Argentine Navy finally climbed aboard, they did not just want to know why he was late. They wanted to know what he had been carrying, and the answer was already gone, because everything that could tell them where this boat had been and who had been on it had been thrown into the sea. A boat with no name and no face. The logbook was gone, and so was the war diary, the charts, the code books. Every record a submarine is required by law to keep. The crew came up the ladder carrying no identification at all. Not a single man, as if they had emptied their own pockets on the way in. And the deck gun had been thrown overboard, along with the torpedoes, the radios, the small arms, and even one of the boat's inflatable dinghies, which no one could ever account for. Now think about what all of that takes, because you do not strip a boat of every trace of itself by accident. Someone had gone through U-530 on purpose and erased her, piece by piece, before she ever showed her face in port. And when she finally tied up, an officer described her as having a calamitous look, like a vessel that had been through something it did not want remembered. The officer who sailed the boat in was tall, blonde, and Nordic looking, but the real commander on U-530's papers, a man named Otto Vermuth, was short and dark, and the Argentine investigators noticed the difference at once. They were convinced the boat had changed hands somewhere out at sea, that the man in charge at the surrender was not the man who was supposed to be there, and that a mutiny or something stranger had happened under the waterline. When they finally sat him down to question him, over 3 days in the middle of July, he gave them almost nothing because he would not say why the voyage had taken so long, and he would not say why the boat was stripped. All he would admit was that he had been handed a mission of reconnaissance and attack directly from Berlin, and then he went quiet. One officer would not let it go. An Argentine coastal soldier named Romulo Bustos wrote that in the weeks before these submarines came in, he was convinced boats had been quietly putting people ashore along the Atlantic coast, at night and off the record. He wrote it down, and nobody wanted to hear it. So the boat was scrubbed, the crew was faceless. The commander may have been a stranger, and someone, maybe, had already slipped ashore in the dark. The Argentines had every reason on earth to keep digging, but instead, a story arrived that made all of it go quiet. The story everyone agreed to believe. That story was simple, and that was the whole point of it. The captain, they said, was just a proud man who could not stomach surrender, so he sailed as far from the ruins of Germany as he could before giving up. And the missing papers were nothing sinister, only an officer burning secrets so the enemy could not read them. And the boat itself had carried no one who mattered. That last part was even made official because the Argentine Naval Ministry put out a formal statement saying U-530 had carried no Nazi leader, no senior officer, and had put no one ashore before she surrendered. Case closed. A strange boat, a stubborn captain, and nothing more. Then the crew was handed over to the Americans, who took them away and questioned them for weeks. But here is when something quiet happened that should have been the loudest part of all. The records of those interrogations were locked up and classified, sealed away for decades. So ask yourself one simple thing. If this really was just a nervous captain and an empty boat, what was said in those rooms that the most powerful country on Earth needed to hide for the next 40 years? You do not bury a footnote, you bury a problem. And the timing is where the back of your neck starts to prickle, because U-530 surrendered on the 10th of July, 1945, and just 6 days later, on the 16th of July, out in the New Mexico desert, the United States set off the first atomic bomb in history. The world was about to split into before and after. So, if you were moving something valuable out of a dying Germany, whether a person, a document, or a piece of technology, the narrow window before that morning was the window that was worth everything, because after it, the whole board changed. The clean official story held for about 30 years, until the people who study these things started pulling at the threads and the whole thing came loose. Because there was one rumor the clean story was never able to kill, and the rumor has a name. The name they could not stop whispering. From almost the moment U-530 appeared, people in Argentina began to whisper that she had not come alone. A reporter claimed he had seen a police report describing a strange submarine surfacing off the southern coast and landing 2 people in the dark, an officer and a civilian, and that the civilian might have been Hitler himself, with Eva Braun beside him, in disguise. Then, a second U-boat, U-977, slipped into the very same port 5 weeks later, after staying underwater for 66 days straight. But the 2 boats did not even match, because U-977 came in with her logs and papers intact, everything in order and nothing to hide, while U-530 had come in, with hers burned and thrown into the sea. One boat surrendered like a beaten crew, and the other behaved like it was covering its tracks. But years later, an entire book would lay out the claim that more than 50 senior Nazis had escaped to Argentina by submarine. And for 80 years, that is where the story of this boat lived, in the world of the conspiracy theorist and the late-night forum, the thing serious people rolled their eyes at. Then, in 2018, science finally spoke, and it did not say what the theorists wanted. A team of French forensic experts was given rare access to the teeth and skull fragments held in Moscow that the Soviets had always claimed were Hitler's, and they matched them against his own dentist's records. Their answer was flat and final. The teeth were real, they were his, and Hitler had died in that bunker in 1945, from cyanide and a bullet. And in the words of the lead scientist, he did not flee to Argentina in a submarine. So that should be the end of it, because Hitler was not on this boat. But watch closely what that actually does, because when you take Hitler away, the boat does not get simpler, it gets stranger. U-530 still surrendered too late, in the wrong ocean, scrubbed to the bone, with people maybe already gone in the night. So when you remove the one name the whole world argued about for 80 years, every real unexplained thing about this submarine is still sitting right there, untouched. Which means the question was never really whether Hitler was aboard. It was what these boats were built to carry once he was ruled out, and who else was riding them south. The answer to that has a name too, but this one is not a rumor, it is documented history. The Rat Line. In the last months of the war, as Germany fell apart, a network took shape to move people out. And not soldiers or desperate refugees, but wanted men, the war criminals and officers and scientists with the most to answer for and the most to trade. The routes ran south through Spain and through Italy, and they ended again and again in the same place, Argentina. And Argentina was waiting for them, because under its leader at the time, Juan Perón, the country quietly opened its doors to fleeing Nazis, handed out fresh papers under fresh names, and asked almost nothing in return. This is not a theory, and this is the part that should stay with you, because the men who ran the death camps ended up there. Adolf Eichmann, who organized the murder of millions, lived openly near Buenos Aires for years, until Israeli agents grabbed him off a quiet street and flew him out to stand trial. Joseph Mengele, the doctor of Auschwitz, slipped through the same network and died as a free man on a South American beach, never once punished. And Erich Priebke, responsible for a massacre in Rome, ran a shop in an Argentine mountain town for half a century. So, the Rat Line was real, It worked, and it hid monsters in plain sight for decades, and it moved exactly the kind of cargo that a stripped-down, long-range submarine crossing the ocean in silence was perfect for. Look back at U-530 now, with all of that in your head. A boat that sailed a deliberate route to Argentina that was wiped clean of every record, with a captain who may have been swapped out at sea, and people possibly slipped ashore in the dark. That is not a lost warship that got confused. That is one more vehicle on an escape line that historians already know existed. And an escape line keeps records because somebody, somewhere, always writes down who they moved and where. For 80 years, no one had ever found that list for these boats until now, when the river gave one up. What the river gave up. Here is the part that drags all of it out of the past and into right now. According to the account that has surfaced, U-530 never truly left. Local divers knew it was there, and fishermen had cursed it for decades, but every one of them wrote it off as a broken, empty hull. They were wrong on every count, and it took a new machine to prove it, because a survey crew ran a modern sonar across that seabed, the kind that builds a picture sharp enough to tell a submarine from a rock. And the shape that came back was unmistakable. Not a fragment, not scattered debris, but a submarine, almost whole, resting on her side in the mud, with her hull still holding its shape after 80 years down there. When divers finally went down and reached the conning tower, they say they found the thing that changed everything because the forward hatch had been welded shut, and it had been welded from the inside. Someone had sealed a room off on purpose, from within, before the boat went down, and it took 3 full days to cut through it. And whatever was behind that welded door had not aged. The rest of the wreck had been eaten alive by 80 years of silt and salt and rot, the way every old wreck is. But this one sealed room had been cut off from the water the entire time, so it came out almost perfectly preserved, and that, when you think about what it means, is its own kind of horror. Inside were 5 metal containers bolted to the wall, and 3 of them had failed, so whatever they held is gone forever. But 2 of them had held. The first was packed with documents wrapped in oilskin, letters written in 3 different languages, and one of those 3 was English. The second held a heavy ledger, and its pages were so fragile that experts spent weeks stabilizing them before anyone dared turn a single one. On some of those pages, the ink had faded so far that the writing was simply gone, invisible to the naked eye. The team lit the paper with special cameras, the kind that read infrared and ultraviolet light that the human eye cannot see, and watched letters that had vanished decades ago crawl back into view. Without that trick, half of what was written would have stayed lost forever, but with it, the names came back. And when they finally read it, it was not a crew list. It was a passenger log laid out the exact way a civilian shipping line records its travelers over several months. This was not a panicked escape. It was a planned, patient evacuation, written out by hand. 61 names, and 9 of them were American. 9 Americans. 9 Americans on a Nazi submarine, on a Nazi escape line in 1945. Sit with how wrong that is, because this was a boat built to smuggle the enemy's most wanted men to safety. So every name in that log should have been German, or the kind of European traitor who had a reason to run. Instead, 9 of the 61 were listed as citizens of the country that had just spent 4 years tearing the Third Reich apart. So, what on earth were they doing on board? There are only 3 ways to explain it, and each one is darker than the last. The first is that they were prisoners, captured American soldiers, or agents hauled across the ocean for reasons no one really wants to picture. But you do not waste precious room on a secret escape submarine to drag prisoners all the way to South America, because there are easier ways to hold a man or to make him disappear, so that one does not fit. The second is that they were traitors, Americans who had spent the war working with the Nazi regime, for money or belief or power, and who now needed to vanish alongside the very men they had helped. And as ugly as that sounds, it is not fantasy, because there were American businessmen and public figures whose dealings with the German state before and during the war have kept serious historians busy for decades, and some of the names tangled up in that scholarship are names you would recognize the moment you heard them. But it is the third explanation that empties the room and lowers the temperature, because what if the 9 Americans were not fleeing at all? What if they were the ones running the escape? Not passengers, but handlers and escorts, men put on that boat to make sure the cargo, whatever it truly was, reached Argentina safely and silently on behalf of someone very high up back home. And there is a real, admitted program that makes that idea impossible to laugh off. It was called Operation Paperclip. And after the war, the United States quietly brought more than 1,600 German scientists and engineers to America. Many of them pulled straight out of the Nazi war machine and had their records scrubbed clean so they could work in American labs. That program is documented, and nobody denies it anymore. But researchers have argued for years that Paperclip was only the polished surface they let the public see, and that the most sensitive transfers of all never touched a single official page. So 9 Americans on a sealed submarine, riding the rat line into Argentina, fits that hidden version far too well. And there is one detail on that log that turns a dark guess into something much colder: the code and the silence. Every name in that log carries a code beside it, a short mark that quietly says why that person was on the boat. For the European passengers, the codes line up with jobs, with scientists, engineers, or officers. The people the rat line was built to save, sorted neatly by what made them worth saving. But the 9 Americans do not carry any of those codes. They carry a different one, a single mark that appears nowhere else in the entire log, that matches no known German record, and that no one has yet been able to crack. 9 people, set apart from every other soul on that boat, filed under a reason all their own. And that is the whole story in one line. These 9 were not scientists waiting to be rescued, and they were not refugees. They were something the German bookkeeper had no normal box to tick, because they did not belong to the escape at all. They were standing over it. If that log is real, then some of the people who made sure the worst men of the 20th century sailed off to a comfortable freedom were not the enemy. They were Americans. And their names spent 80 years sealed in a metal box at the bottom of a river, in exactly the spot where somebody meant for them to stay. But here is the part that should keep you awake tonight, because this story is not finished. It is still moving. Those 9 names have reportedly been handed to Argentine authorities, who then formally asked the United States to open its files, its national archives, and its intelligence records under a law written for this exact moment, the Nazi War Crimes Disclosure Act. The request went in, and the answer, so far, has been silence, with no release, no denial, and nothing at all. And it is not only the names, because that first container held letters, remember, written in 3 languages, one of them English, and nobody outside a locked conservation lab has been told what those letters say, or who signed them. So, now 4 different governments and a tangle of old maritime law are all quietly arguing over who gets to decide what the world is allowed to see, which is really just another way of saying the deciding could take longer than anyone will be around to watch. So, the boat is not really the mystery anymore, because the boat gave up everything it had. The real question now is who received that list of 9 American names, read it, and decided that 80 years still was not long enough for you to be trusted with it. So, tell me in the comments what you believe those 9 names really were: prisoners, traitors, or the men your own country sent to bring its enemies home. Because the river already gave up its secret, the people holding those 9 names still have not.